In the summer of 1212, something extraordinary happened in Europe. It wasn't an army of knights riding under banners. It wasn't kings raising taxes for yet another crusade. Instead, thousands of children, teenagers, and poor peasants began marching across France and Germany with a breathtakingly simple idea. If armored warriors could not retake the Holy Land, maybe innocence itself could succeed. They believed God would open the seas for them, that Jerusalem would fall not to swords but to faith, and that children's purity would triumph where hardened men had failed. It became known as the Children's Crusade, a movement so strange, so moving, and so tragic that even today historians argue about what really happened. Was it truly thousands of children, or a mass of the poor swept up in hope? Either way, it was a march unlike any other in history, ending at heartbreak but leaving behind powerful lessons. Why did it happen? The early 13th century was an age of crusading fever. For more than 100 years, popes and kings had urged Christian Europe to march to the Holy Land, capture Jerusalem, and hold it against Muslim powers. The First Crusade, launched in 1096, has succeeded beyond expectations. Crusaders stormed Jerusalem in 1099 and carved out 4 fragile Crusader states. But the victories faded. By the end of the 12th century, these states had weakened. The Third Crusade, famous for Richard the Lionheart, managed to recapture some coastal cities but failed to retake Jerusalem itself. The Fourth Crusade, launched in 1202, ended in an outright scandal when Western armies sacked Constantinople, the largest Christian city in the East, in 1204. For many ordinary believers, the dream of recovering the Holy Land seemed as far away as ever. And yet, the longing did not die. Pilgrims, priests, and villagers across Europe prayed for Jerusalem daily. Sermons thundered about the duty to fight for Christ's tomb. But by 1212, something else was happening, a shift in who responded. Nobles and knights who had once rushed to join had grown cautious. Crusading was expensive and dangerous. Many lords had already gone bankrupt on earlier expeditions. However, ordinary people, the poor, the young, the landless, still longed for a miracle. Into this atmosphere stepped 2 charismatic figures. In northern France, a shepherd boy named Stephen of Cloyes appeared at the court of King Philip II in early 1212. Chroniclers say Stephen claimed he carried a letter from Christ himself, instructing him to lead a crusade of children. He preached with fiery words, and within weeks crowds of youths and peasants gathered to follow him. Some modern historians believe Stephen may have been around 12 years old. Others say he was a teenager. But what matters is that he was young enough to embody innocence in the eyes of those who listened. Meanwhile, in the Rhineland of Germany, another youth named Nicholas, often called Nicholas of Cologne, was also preaching. He told villagers that children were chosen by God to free the Holy Land. His words carried through towns and marketplaces. Bands of children, teenagers, and poor adults began to fall in behind him. The numbers grew astonishingly fast. Alberic of Trois-Fontaines, a 13th century chronicler, claimed as many as 30,000 followed Nicholas in Germany and 20,000 followed Stephen in France. These figures are probably inflated, but even if cut in half, they represent a mass movement unmatched by anything of its kind. Why children? In part because of theology. Medieval thought held that children were closer to God, less corrupted by sin. Chroniclers often describe the innocent prayers of children as more powerful than the rituals of adults. If armored knights had failed, perhaps the purity of the young could succeed. There was also social desperation. Many of those who joined were not literally small children but pueri, a Latin word meaning youths or the humble. They were poor farmhands, servants, apprentices, or actual boys and girls with little to lose. In an age of hunger, hardship, and rigid class systems, the call to march for God's will gave them a sense of purpose and dignity. The religious mood of the time amplified this. In the early 13th century, waves of popular piety swept through Europe. Pilgrimages grew in popularity, holy relics drew massive crowds, and the preaching of new orders like the Franciscans stirred enthusiasm among the poor. The idea that ordinary people, even children, could play a world-changing role no longer seemed absurd. Interestingly, the papacy itself had not called this crusade. Pope Innocent III, who had authorized earlier campaigns, was initially skeptical. But when news of the Children's March reached Rome, he reportedly remarked that the zeal of these children puts us to shame. To him, their faith was a rebuke to the lukewarm response of adults. The Children's Crusade, then, was born from a mix of failure and hope. Failure of the adult world to hold Jerusalem, and hope that childlike purity could succeed. It was a grassroots movement, not organized by kings or nobles, but by preachers barely old enough to shave. And from the start, it bore both inspiring innocence and tragic naivety. Parents, unable to restrain their children, watched sons and daughters vanish down the roads, singing hymns. Villagers stood stunned as thousands of barefoot boys and girls streamed past, carrying little crosses and banners. To some, it seemed a miracle. To others, a madness. The stage was set for one of the strangest marches in history. It would carry children and the poor across France, through the Alps of Germany and Italy, and down to the shores of the Mediterranean. They expected seas to part, cities to open, and victory to come through faith alone. But what awaited them was far harsher: hunger, betrayal, and heartbreak. The march and its stories. The French group, led by Stephen of Cloyes, gathered at St. Denis and then moved south toward the Mediterranean. Chroniclers say they sang, "Lord, now free the Holy Cross," and believed the sea would part, like the Red Sea in the story of Moses. Some accounts describe them carrying banners marked with a lamb, a symbol of innocence. Such accounts may be embellished, but it is recorded that along the way, villagers greeted them with wonder and sometimes hostility, as thousands of ragged children passed through. The German group, led by Nicholas, headed south through the Alps toward Italy. Their journey was harsher. Accounts tell of children trudging barefoot through mountain passes, many dying of exhaustion. Still, they pressed on, believing God would protect them. In places, townspeople gave them bread and shelter. In others, they were mocked as fools. One of the most poignant stories comes from Genoa, where Nicholas's crusaders finally reached the sea. Believing it would part for them, they gathered on the shore, praying for a miracle. When the waters did not open, many wept, confused and brokenhearted. Some stayed in Italy, others tried to return home, and many simply disappeared from records. The French crusaders' fate was darker still. When Stephen's group reached Marseille, merchants offered them ships. The children believed God had answered their prayers. But chroniclers like Alberic and later Matthew Paris recorded a terrible betrayal. The children were sold into slavery in North Africa. 2 shiploads reportedly sank in storms, drowning hundreds. The survivors ended up in Tunis or Alexandria, lost to history. Were these tales exaggerated? Historians debate. Some argue the slavery story reflects later moralizing, but evidence suggests that at least some crusaders never returned. For many families, their children were simply gone, swallowed by the march. Despite the tragedy, some inspiring accounts survive. A few of Nicholas's followers reportedly reached Rome. When Pope Innocent III met them, he praised their faith but released them from their crusading vows, telling them they were too young. Many walked home, battered but alive. Their survival, after such hardship, became a kind of miracle in itself. This was not a military crusade, but it was a crusade of the heart. Ordinary people, young, poor, powerless, believed they could change the course of history through faith alone. What really happened? Myths and theories. The Children's Crusade is one of the most debated episodes of medieval history. What exactly happened? First, the numbers. Medieval chroniclers loved big figures: 30,000, 50,000, even more. Modern historians suggest the actual numbers were smaller, but still in the tens of thousands. Even if only half were truly children, it was still an astonishing gathering. Second, the idea of children. Some argue the term pueri, used in Latin sources, didn't just mean literal children, but the poor, the humble, or the landless. So the Children's Crusade may have been a mass movement of youth and peasants together, not an army of school children. Third, the fate. Did thousands really get sold into slavery? Some sources say yes. Others say the Crusaders simply scattered and went home. There's no definitive proof of mass enslavement, but the fact that chroniclers repeated this story suggests it reflected the perceived tragedy of lost innocence. Fourth, the meaning. Why did it happen? Some scholars see it as a grassroots religious revival, a movement of the marginalized demanding a place in God's plan. Others see it as desperation, a generation inspired by sermons, myths of crusading glory, and the promise of miracles. Could it have been avoided? Some think stronger church leadership might have stopped it before it grew. Others argue it was inevitable, a symbol of widespread frustration after the failures of adult-led crusades. When knights and kings faltered, people turned to the idea of innocence itself as a last hope. It's worth noting how the Church reacted. Though Pope Innocent III did not support it, he admired the children's faith. Later writers in the 13th and 14th centuries treated the Children's Crusade as a cautionary tale, both inspiring and tragic. To some, it was proof of devotion. To others, it was a warning about misguided zeal. In the end, the Children's Crusade was not a single army, but a wave of movements, stories, and myths woven together. That's why it remains so mysterious and so haunting. Effects and legacy. The Children's Crusade left no new kingdoms, no victories, and no castles in the Holy Land. But it left a deep mark on Europe's imagination. For families, the loss was personal. Parents saw their children vanish, never to return. Communities remembered the marches for generations as stories of faith and tragedy. For the Church, it was both inspiring and troubling. Inspiring because it showed the power of belief among ordinary people. Troubling because it revealed how far people would go without guidance, and how badly things could end without leadership. In literature and sermons, the Children's Crusade became a symbol. To some medieval writers, it showed the folly of trusting in innocence without wisdom. To others, it represented a pure kind of faith, untainted by greed. The idea lived on. Centuries later, poets and artists revisited it. In the 20th century, it became a metaphor for youth movements, for innocence caught in the storms of history. The strangest effect was psychological. After 1212, later crusades, like the Fifth Crusade in 1217, were shaped by a sense of urgency. Leaders knew they had to respond to popular passion or risk losing control. In this way, the Children's March indirectly influenced the course of real crusading policy. Modern historians see the Children's Crusade as part myth, part reality. The numbers may have been exaggerated, the stories of slavery may be moral lessons, but something remarkable did happen in 1212. A mass march of youth and poor people, filled with hope, had crossed countries and shocked leaders. Its legacy is poignancy. It shows us how deeply people longed for meaning, for victory, for miracles. It shows us the dangers of misplaced hope, and it reminds us of the enduring power of young voices, even when ignored. The Children's Crusade didn't conquer Jerusalem, but it conquered Europe's memory. Conclusion. The Children's Crusade of 1212 was history's strangest march, not of knights and kings, but of children and the powerless, setting out with songs and faith. They believed their innocence could change the world. Instead, they met hunger, betrayal, and tragedy. Yet their story endures. It endures because it reveals something timeless: the human hunger for hope, the courage of youth, and the risks of blind faith. Even in failure, it stirred imaginations for centuries. Did thousands of children really walk across Europe? Were they betrayed, enslaved, or simply dispersed? Historians may never agree, but what we know is enough. Their march shook Europe and became one of the most haunting legends of the Middle Ages. The Children's Crusade reminds us that sometimes history is not only about victories, but about dreams. Dreams so powerful that even in failure, they leave a mark forever. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Crusades, check out our book, The Crusades, a captivating guide to the military expeditions during the Middle Ages that departed from Europe with the goal to free Jerusalem and aid Christianity in the Holy Land. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.